Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Motivate Property Podcast. I'm Karli Davies and I'm here with Corey Jones, owner and founder of Motivate Property Group. Corey, take us back to the moment you realised that you wanted to take control of your financial future. What was going on in your life?
Right on. Well, this sort of requires me to take a bit of a step back into a blast from the past, we'll call it, right? I guess to give you a short answer, it was a decision I made as a child without really knowing it, right? Let's just say there was some stuff that went on. We can explore this if you really want to. But I kind of realized as a kid actually how important money was in order to live a life, right, in today's society. So much so that I subconsciously compensated for that for most of my adult life. Do you want to dig into that?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go there.
All right, I'll start from the top. So I was born in America, right? My mum was from Perth. My dad, who is no longer around, well, he passed away. He was from Florida, well, Tennessee, and down through the south there in Florida. And so when my mum was in her 20s, she actually left Australia, went traveling, ended up going over there for like 15 years, met my dad, settled down, got married, had me. And look, let's just say that, relationship didn't work. It was probably a pretty bad place for me to be raised. And so they ended up separating, divorcing, and then my mum brought me over here. And so I moved here when I was almost 6. I remember having my first 6th birthday here. Now, when we came here with nothing. Now, when I say with nothing, I'm talking like a couple of suitcases with some shit. That was it. All right.
Yeah.
So I remember being 6 and living with my nan. Right. That's where we sort of started. And it was just me and mum. All right. So me and my mum she was doing, I remember, as a kid as well, she's doing like a lot of night school to get some kind of qualifications in Australia.
Yeah.
And she was just working her absolute ass off to try and put food on the table. And so, living with nan obviously made things easy because she's got a fairly nice house, a lot of space, and I was just sort of growing up there.
Yeah.
And then when my mum got a real, I guess, kind of her first sort of stable job being back here was when she was saving away and basically bought a house. When she bought that house, so this was in, I want to say 1999. I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah, 1999. She bought the house and it was in Maddington. Do you know Maddington?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that's where I grew up. So that's where I first came. And so, ironically, one of the things that happened when I came over here, being a kid who was sort of born and raised in the US, coming over here, like I obviously wasn't really aware of what the culture difference was. Right.
Of course. Why would you?
No idea. Right. And so I was just assuming that society was the same. And, I sort of found out the hard way that people were different over here, right?
In what way?
Let's just say that I was, I'm not sure how far we want to go into this, but let's just say that in the US, and so one of the things that I've noticed as I've sort of gotten older, I'm going back to the US quite a bit, like there's a culture there where, you can, as you're walking down the aisle, like it's normal to just say hello to everybody.
Yeah.
That's part of the culture, right? Found out the hard way, that's not the culture over here. And so, when I first got here, I realized you can't necessarily just walk up to any kid and just start playing around, and I got punched in the mouth.
Oh, no.
Right. So that was a bit of a, I remember that happening. It was in Belmont. It was at my auntie and uncle's house, at the park, wanted to play with some kid and then got punched in the teeth. And so, one of the first lessons that I learned was, you can't just go and do that over here like you would over there, right? And obviously that was the first kind of time that I sort of realized, hang on a second, something's wrong here. Something isn't not saying Australia's wrong, but something about the way that I've been brought, like there's a mismatch in expectation and reality. All right. Now, then I started going to school and went to school at the local school in Maddington. Now, at the time, and again, this is in 1999, one of the things that started to sort of come from that was like every lunchtime I was getting into fights.
Yeah, okay.
All the time, right?
Because you're angry?
Well, I was a very angry kid.
Yeah.
Right? But I and I guess that there was two parts there. Like one is not having a dad around, right? So there's an element of having to be the masculine figure of the household. And again, as a 6-year-old kid, you don't even know what that means, right? You don't,
Yeah.
None of this it was all subconscious, right? But there's an element of me knowing at home I haven't got any protector. So I have to be able to protect myself.
Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, and I guess to sort of give a little bit more info, I was the only white kid in the school or in my class at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very multicultural school.
And so I was kind of the odd one out.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I was getting bullied, I was the one who didn't have Nike shoes. There was all these kind of things that was starting to layer and layer and layer. And so really, I just became a very angry kid.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't until that first year. So this is again 99. I remember. I'll never forget this. We were in Kmart, late night shopping. I remember I was sitting in the trolley. My mum was pushing it, and we were in the shoe section at Kmart.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember my mum asking a question. She was like, "Hey Corey, do you really want to play football this year? Because if so, I can get you some of the footy boots, on the shelf there. If you don't, I'll get myself some slippers for winter."
Yeah, right.
And that was the point where I really, for me, it was like, whoa, something isn't right here with this picture. And again, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't really understand the kind of gravity. All I really understood was we have to sacrifice shit here.
Yeah.
And there's no doesn't really feel like we've got a lot of control right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
And so really, that was kind of, I guess, sort of the first point where I was really starting to question our reality, right? And when I say that, just society in general.
Yeah.
How can people live this way, other people live that way? And as a 6-year-old kid, I just didn't understand. I didn't really have the answers for it.
Yeah, of course.
And so, again, living with mum, I remember getting bullied because one of the kids that I was hanging around with, on one of the weekends, invited him to my house, and then he saw the mattress that me and mum shared in the living area because she didn't have enough money to buy a bed.
Yeah.
And so I remember these kids were starting to bully me for that, and it's like, this is just making me angrier, and I was just becoming this resentful little bitter little kid, who felt like who felt like I was just I'm alone, and that was kind of the.
And you would.
Well, yeah. Look, any kid who goes through shit like that, of course. I mean, it'd be kind of unreasonable to think that they wouldn't. But again, this is all in a world of not really being aware of what your emotions are and being able to really kind of handle it and deal with it, right? And so, again, as a male, I am generalizing here, but we get violent. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And so, my way of dealing with it was to just not get. I'm going to fight back.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of my very early days. But I think to really give you a proper answer of why money became important and what sort of changed, it really was seeing the work and what my mum had to put in to put food on the table and make it really work for us.
Yeah.
Now, I would say, I'm extraordinarily grateful for my mum bringing me here, right? Because I think that if I had have grown up in where I was, from in the US, I think the chances of me succeeding would be dramatically lower. With the environment that's over there, and it's not just the guns. It's with American culture, it's the drugs, the gangs, it is a lot worse over there than it is over here, right? Yeah. Especially where I'm from in Florida, where especially back in the 80s and 70s and 80s, there's a lot of the cocaine came from South America through Florida, right? So
wow.
A lot of that residual kind of mafia, that's very present around where I'm from. So I could just imagine myself getting caught up like a lot of other guys that I grew up with.
Yeah.
But the courage from my mum was, I think that was probably the first time or the first thing that made me really question really how society's functioning, and then this thing called money, and the fact that the more money you've got, the more options you've got. The less you've got, it's like, I remember just feeling helpless.
Yeah.
Like there's just nothing.
Yeah.
So that for me was I think that was really where I guess kind of the seed was planted.
Yeah. So it sounds like your environment really shaped how you kind of were experiencing money. So at what point did you go like, I really need to do something here?
Yeah, good. Good question. So that was, I guess, sort of where it kind of started. And really, I didn't make the decision then, but what I had noticed at that point as a 6-year-old kid was something was wrong.
Yeah.
Something was wrong. I'm alone. And, there's all these kind of problems that are sort of fragmenting from that.
Almost like no one's coming to rescue me.
No one's coming to rescue me, right? Now, my mum ended up meeting my stepdad a couple of years later, and I call him dad, and he practically raised me from when I was like 9 or 10 when I first met him. And obviously having dual incomes and, could buy another house. We upgraded homes and moved to Gosnells and, sort of bigger house and, life obviously got a lot easier. And, I would say I went from probably no privilege to being probably in a more privileged situation.
Mm.
But then I think what happened was when I was that kind of 15, 16, 17, sort of year 10 onwards, obviously the question of what do you want to do when you're older starts popping up in school.
It does.
Right. And again, watching my dad, my real dad, Ron, in the US, he was a carpenter, and he was always in and out of work. My stepdad, Keith, he is a truck driver, been driving trucks for, 30 plus years, absolutely loves it, loves operating machinery, Now, the question that I was sort of posing to myself was, well, what do I want to do with my time? And a lot of these kind of conversations of, do something you enjoy, or do something you're really passionate about, or do something you love doing. That way you can never work a day in your life, right? And like that was kind of like, well, that makes sense. Like, well, why shouldn't I go and pursue something like that?
Yeah.
And so I was really trying to work out, like, what do I actually want to do? Like, what's important, right? And so whether it was physical exercise, whether it was something in sport, because I love playing sport, really what it came down to was, like, I wanted to use my, and I guess for a way to express it, I wanted to use my hands and not be stuck in an office. And that was my perspective.
Yeah.
But again...
And here you are.
we'll see. This is the irony, right? Like, that, while that was my perspective, that wasn't my perspective. Someone else had told me that.
Yeah.
That was put into me.
Yeah.
Right? From all the people I was trying to get guidance from, aunties and uncles and mum and dad and all these different things, right? And so, when people are saying, do something you love, that way you never get to work a day in your life, or, do something where you're out in the office and you're using your hands instead of being locked in in a cage. Like, these kind of narratives were what was forming my decision making.
Mm.
And then that was sort of when I stumbled into, the options of going into the military, right? And that's where I looked to join the Navy. Now, when I it wasn't until I was probably two and a half years in the Navy, I got posted to one of the warships based in Garden Island in Rockingham, and then that's when I went on my first deployment, and that was to the Middle East. So that was to the Gulf for 6 months. Now, when you go away, right, and then this is essentially the kind of the culture in the Navy. When you go away on a deployment, it was always one of those things in the crew. It's like, it's a very desirable thing to want to go and do, right? In fact, a lot of people were kind of clamoring to be able to do it.
Mm.
Now, the point is, you're going away on a mission for, say, 6 months.
Yeah.
Right? And there's obviously a lot of work you got to do beforehand and afterwards, but, 6 months you're away, right? Now, a lot of guys wanted to do it because, when you get posted to one of those operations, you're away at sea for 6 months, you don't spend any money. So it's a very good way
to save.
To save, right? It's a huge saving mechanism. But because you're in an active war zone, you don't pay tax either. So all the dollars you earn are tax free as soon as you enter the zone, all the way through until you exit the zone. And so guys would go on, these operations, they'd come back with 50, 60, 80, 100 grand.
Yeah.
All right, depending on your situation. But again, one of the things that I was seeing there was, guys this would be like their third deployment. And it's almost, I could almost see like a desperation of them wanting to go for the third one, because the first two, they just pissed them off the wall.
Yeah.
So it's like you're literally taking 6 months of your life to serve the country on the hope and on the basis that you're going to go and do something with that money and set yourself up. You get back so emotionally fucked up from being away. All you want to do is buy the new car, go on the holidays, go and do all the things, and like we say with our FIFOs, you're flooding, you're blaming the dopamine. That's all you do. All right?
Yep.
within a few weeks of returning, a lot of the guys on the ship, their money was gone.
Yeah.
Toast.
Wow.
Right? And so, again, from where I came from, and really, if I could summarize what my mum taught me, she was working during the day, sending herself to night school at night, to essentially put food on the table for her and me, right? She taught me the value of money and how hard you have to work in order to make money, in order to get it.
Yeah.
Right? But then when I'm in the Navy, like, these guys were treating it like shit. Like, they were using money as if it's just this escape mechanism to avoid dealing with their problems.
Yeah.
And so, seeing where I came from, seeing how people operate in the Navy, and it's just two totally different ways of using money. And it's like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that way. I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so what started to happen, and again, I'll use the term fragment. Like, my perspective started to fragment a little bit, because it's like, hang on a second. Like, there has to be something wrong here. Like, this can't be the way that society, like, it just can't work this way. Like,
this isn't life. This isn't normal.
Right. Yeah. And so when I was actually on the ship, so keep in mind I was a sailor, and when you join the military, there's you join as like a non-commissioned officer, an NCO, or a commissioned officer. And so the idea is, I started off as a seaman, admiral seaman, leading seaman. You work your way up, petty officer, all the way up, and think of those guys, the ones who are boots on the ground doing the job. And then you've got your officers, and the officers are the ones who, they go to a different school. They're pretty much the ones who are managing. Let's say when you're in the military. One of the navigator. So he was one of the highest ranking officers on the ship. He was also the navigator. So he was the one who reported directly to the captain about the direction we're going, why we're going there, what we've got to avoid, X, Y, and Z. And it was him who was arrogantly bragging about how he's buying all these properties. That started to really make me start to question, like, what are we doing here, right?
How are you doing that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the first thing. So first, I just want to say this guy was a wanker, right? Like, I'm not, not putting him on a pedestal in any way, shape, or form, because he was a flog.
But it was just a bit of a light switch moment.
Well, it was
different.
It was a holy crap. Why are you doing that, and what the hell's going on here? Like, how is that even possible? What do you mean you're buying investment properties? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And again, keep in mind, I'm 19 at this point.
Yeah. Right.
And so he had one of my mates under his wing who was an NCO, like a non-commissioned officer, and he was like the nav yeoman. He was like kind of like his PA sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And he was buying properties because he had got the guidance from the nav, right? And so I'm sitting here watching one of my mates who's on a similar income, similar kind of qualifications. Like, he's just bought an investment property in Bundaberg, and this is back pre-mining boom. This is also around the mining boom where, and like, long story short, what these guys were doing is actually not good in hindsight. They were buying and accumulating in like mining towns, because the property company they were working with, that was it was just mining towns, right? Yeah. Which obviously we know that those strategies don't really work long term. But nevertheless, like the point is like, the whole idea of these guys buying investment properties was a foreign concept, but B, it just started to open up questions. Yeah. Now, again, where I came from, and I do specifically remember my mum buying that first house at Mannington in 1999.
That would have been such a huge deal for her as well.
It was. Yeah. But the property price was $59,000.
Yeah, you look at that now and you're like, I wish I could buy a property for that much.
And so when I was in the Navy at this point in time, like, I would say that house was probably worth, what, 300 grand, 350, you know what I mean? Yeah. So even when they were talking about property and trying to tell me, because I was asking questions and like, interested to learn more, like the point is like, I could already see, my mum's bought a house for 59, it's now worth 300. If she had done that 10 times over, like, what you guys are doing is making sense. Yeah. Like, this actually, okay, I'm interested to find out more, right? Yeah. And that was, I guess, kind of really where, I guess, the conversation of property investment first started to appear. Yeah. Now, I'll fast forward a little bit. I get home from the deployment. Now, when I got home, I had around $75,000 in cash that I'd saved, because obviously you don't spend any money away. Yeah. While you're away. Yes, I spent a little bit of money, because we went to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and a few different, sort of nice places, a few fucking horrible places. But you know, again, a lot of the guys on the ship, when we did go to Dubai for those 7 days, like they were getting like 5-star resorts with all the money, and it's like they're blowing
Just
the money.
blowing the cash.
They're blowing it, right? And
Yeah.
I understand there is that kind of snapback of dopamine, but I was really trying not to do that. So,
But you also would feel rich having that much just cash bang in your pocket.
of course,
You know, because it's a one lump sum. Like you haven't been able to spend it. It's essentially just sitting there. Like you would feel like you have all this cash to blow.
100%. Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong. I understand why they do it, and I get it.
But it wasn't what you were going to do.
Well, not just that, but it's like I knew of how I saw my mum struggle. I knew, and this is what I essentially told myself as a kid without even recognizing it until I was sort of in my early 20s. Like, how I'm suffering with money today, I'm never going to allow the day to come where my kids are suffering the same way.
Yeah.
And again, that was a decision that I'd made at 6 years old without even really understanding it and knowing that I made that decision.
Yeah.
But my life was built around compensating for that.
100%.
So, you know, when I joined the Navy, again, it wasn't for money. You know, and again, this is the point of my life where I was like, nah, money's fucking whatever, like it's irrelevant, who cares? I was in that kind of wouldn't say negligent, but I was in that kind of naive, you know, it doesn't matter if you're happy, blah, blah, blah. But when I was like in the Navy and actually sacrificing time away, feeling what it was like leaving loved ones at home, missing out on birthdays. I mean, missed out on Christmas and my birthday. You know what I mean? I think it was my 19th or 20th birthday. I was in the middle of the ocean, fucking Middle East. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, not only am I actually feeling what it's like to sacrifice, but if I just do what everyone else around me is doing, what the hell is the point of this? Like, there's no point.
So at what point did you buy your first investment property then?
So when I got back, right? So when I got back, so came back to Australia after the 6 months. And to be fair, it was pretty clear to me that, you know, the long-term Navy career probably wasn't going to be it. Right. And so, like I said, about sort of 70 grand. And that's when I went to go and start talking to people about what to do with it.
Yeah.
So I went and spoke to my parents. And they said, oh, you should buy a house with it.
Of course.
Best thing to do with your money. I had a chat with some other mates of mine who, you know, went to high school with. They're like, oh, you know, you should start a business. So it's, well, people do that. We'll start businesses. Had another mate whose dad was a really successful stockbroker. And obviously he was like, oh, you shouldn't buy shares. You know, in fact, you know, you should buy these shares. We're in these couple of mining companies. They're really good. They're going to blow up, blah, blah, blah. And I guess the point of the story is, it's like I'm talking to all of my closest people, trying to get, you know, the best advice I can possibly get from them. All of them are telling me something different.
Yeah.
And none of them are wealthy.
Yeah. So where'd you go then? So
then my question is, WTF? Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Right. So this is where I had to kind of take things in my own hands. So, this is when like audio books and like Kindles were first kind of kicking off, right?
Yeah.
So I was starting to now start self-educating. Right. It's like, cool. What is investing? What is property invest? Like, what are all these different things? And really, there was probably a good period of like sort of 3 to 6 months of just exploring, like, what are we doing here? Like, what are the options we've got? Now, ironically, what I had done, I'd spoken to a couple of different property investment companies at the time, and I'll never forget this, but fuck me, this is the biggest mistake. I remember speaking to it was a builder, sorry. This was a builder. I was looking to basically build a house in Canning Vale. You know Canning Vale?
Yeah.
All right. I'll never forget. So this was I think it was like a 450 square meter block.
Yeah.
I was booked in to go back to him to sign the paperwork to actually buy it. The whole thing was $299,000.
Okay.
And that's now with the recent boom, that's over $1 million house today.
Yeah, wow.
All right. And that was in 2011, 2012. Right. And I remember I didn't rock. I was scared shitless because I was like, oh man, who would want to live in like a new area? Like, no one wants to live in new areas. No one wants to live in Canning Vale. Like, let's be honest. You know, I used to grow up riding dirt bikes around here. This isn't anywhere.
Yeah.
You look at it today.
Hindsight, hey.
What a fucking idiot I was.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess the point is like, you know, that was an example of me exploring and thinking, oh shit, look, I'm not quite ready. Right. So what I ended up doing was I ended up buying an established property, a little 3x1 in Kenwick. All right. Yeah. So basically when like I said, started in Maddington, moved to Gosnells when I think I was around sort of 12 or so. And then when I joined the Navy, they ended up selling that house. My mum and dad went and travelled, and then I went to the Navy, so I didn't really have anywhere to live. But the family home was still in kind of Kenwick.
Yeah.
It was kind of the, it was one of their investment properties. Well, in fact, it was my dad's original home that when they upgraded homes, they put tenants into it and held on to it.
Awesome.
But that was kind of my postal address.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do was find something local. So I went and found a property nearby, little 3x1, nice, decent block. And I thought, yep, this is it. This is my forever home. I'm going to be here forever.
Mm.
All right. Now, when I'd first bought that house, I was the kind of guy who just ended up finding myself at Bunnings every weekend for some reason.
Something to fix.
Right. So whether it was upgrading this or we're getting new shower rails or fucking whatever. Like the point is like as the months went on as a homeowner, and again I'm talking like 20, 21 at this point.
Yeah.
Like the amount of money that I'm spending on nonsense upgrading this home for the creature comforts, it's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
This is kind of getting out of hand a little bit, right? Now, ironically, my fiance at the time, I'll never forget this because this is kind of one of those life-changing sort of pivotal moments. I heard a bang in the kitchen. So I just finished playing footy. It was a Saturday afternoon. I heard a bang in the kitchen, and she was like, "Oh, fuck this. I want a new kitchen," because she ended up hitting her head on the cupboard, and it was just a bit of a mess, right? So we're like, oh, well, look, I've heard the ad for the home show. The home show's on at the moment. We're going to go down the home show. Let's go check it out. So we ended up going to the home show the following day. And really the idea was let's go and explore kitchens. Mm-hmm. Let's just see what options there are, who to talk to, how much it is. Let's just see if it's even feasible for us to get a new kitchen. Now on the day, when you go to those sort of home shows and expos, it's one of those ones where you just scan your barcode, as many places, all these different competitions, and on you go. And so what did you really think of anything of it was scanning my name and everything. And then the following week, I got a phone call from a lady named Margaret.
Okay.
That Margaret.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Margaret,
cool.
Our Margaret.
Yeah.
Now, Margaret was working for a company, and they were, a property investment wealth creation company, right? So she was the client manager. And so she called me, talked to me about, property investment. Hey, this could be a thing. Hey, look, in fact, we've got a seminar in a couple of weeks. You want to come to it? You can bring one person.
Yeah, right.
So I was like, cool. Well, look, I'll bring my mum. Let's just see how we go.
Let's go.
Let's see how we go. And so ended up going to that seminar. Now, that was one of those ones where, they give you all this information, all this, really good stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's supposed to empower you, motivate you. And then at the end of the night, you become a client, you pay your X amount of thousand, and they help you buy properties.
Yeah. I
was one of those guys and I did it.
Wow. I had no idea that was your story.
Yeah. So I was in the Navy at the time. I think it was like a Wednesday afternoon, went to the seminar at like Pan Pacific in the city. And then, from 7 till 9:30, I was there. And I'll be honest, that night was the night that the penny had really dropped for me.
Yeah.
That was the night where I was like, actually, this entire thing now makes sense. Holy fucking shit.
But what a kind of like fate moment in the sense of like, you weren't really looking for it at the time and it's like changed the whole trajectory of your life. Like that is wild.
Yeah. And so, as much as hindsight is a beautiful thing, that was one of the nights that definitely changed my life. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Because, and again, just to be clear, like, people talk about luck. Right. And I would say, yes, I was very lucky, to not only sort of be there and see it and be able to experience it, but it's more about who I was and what I was looking for is what made it important.
100%.
Right. It's preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
The point is I had already kind of prepared myself and primed my brain.
You're already softened to the idea of
I'm already looking
for it.
Yeah. I'm looking for a solution.
Yeah.
Right? And then, the way it was kind of presented, it's like, fuck, this is the solution I've been looking for.
Yeah.
And so, like, everything about me, I go like a bull at a gate. I got a bit crazy. So,
no, really?
So it was one of those ones where it's like, holy shit, tunnel vision. This is now the direction I'm going. So, and again, I didn't talk to my fiance at the time. I just became a client, paid the money, and then we're like, hey, babe, guess what? We're moving out of the house. We're going to rent it out. That's going to become a first investment property. We're going to go rent it around the corner. And we're going to go buy an investment property in Queensland. And she was like, what the fuck are you doing?
She was
No.
like, what?
Like,
No.
we're not doing any of this.
Yeah.
And I remember, at the time, Mum was like, oh, Queensland, I don't know about that. You can't see, you can't touch the property. I remember, my ex-fiance's dad was like, oh, no, I wouldn't know. That's a scam, mate. Like this whole, and like every person I spoke to was like, nah, man, this is a scam. Like you can't go forward with this.
Yeah.
Even my friends from high school, like all of them were saying pretty similar stuff.
It comes down to that comment of like, you can't listen to people who haven't actually done the journey though, isn't it? Because they can say all they want, blue in the face.
Yep.
But the truth is they're often the loudest voices, aren't they, that are speaking. But in reality, we shouldn't really listen because they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. Even though it could have 100% been a scam, but it wasn't. So,
well, we'll get there. I'm not saying it was a scam. I was going to be clear. I'm not saying it wasn't.
No.
But I guess the thing, like my perspective at the time, and again, without really knowing this and saying this exact thing, I would rather be curious and wealthy than skeptical and broke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it was just, what, like, again, 21, what have I got to lose here? Like, there's nothing to lose here.
Yeah.
Let's just see, right?
Yeah.
And so what had happened? I became a client, and I did those things. I moved out of the house, put tenants into it. Tenants started paying it off. We moved into a rental around the corner because it was cheaper renting. And the house that we got had a new kitchen, had a shed, had all the stuff that we wanted. And we were living there and renting cheaper than what it was costing to own, which is again one of the principles of rent investing. And so I was implementing it like no tomorrow. Like I'm all in. And then obviously bought the investment property in Brisbane. Bought it for $403,000. It's worth about $750 today. So like it worked out really, really bloody well, right?
Yeah.
But then my 4 years in the Navy was coming to an end, right? And so then the question is, well, what do I do? All right, because the Navy has given me I guess a good platform to start my career, but really what it taught me was, what do I like doing? What do I not like doing? And to be fair, one of the things that I had sort of like one of the things that became apparent at that point, and this is like again first started investing, started understanding property and the mechanics of it. The thing that really kind of came to my mind at that point was like, hang on, fuck what makes you happy. What's going to put you in the best position to make as much money as you can?
Yeah.
To then invest as much as you can, triple-A your income, and have financial freedom as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And then you can focus on what you love.
Yeah.
That then became my mindset. Right? And so I put my discharge in for the Navy, and it's a 12-month situation of exiting and, all the stuff. And so I know that, I've got a few months left to go. I'm banking up all my annual leave so that when I make, the next move, I'm making it with as much buffer and, space I can possibly get. And so being in the Navy, I had a bunch of options. The doors open, right?
Yeah.
I had a few different people, and my fiance at the time was working for a recruiter for a mining company. So I could get any entry-level role straight away.
Yeah.
Ex-Navy. I had applied and, passed all the aptitude testing for a apprenticeship for Komatsu, which is one of the big, like as a diesel mechanic, like a big,
right.
Big equipment company. When I was scrolling on Seek, that's when I then noticed a client manager position at that same company.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, let's explore this. Let's see what this is. So I clicked on the ad, went through the process. And it was basically what Margaret's job was.
Yeah.
Right. So as a client manager. Now, at the time, it was like an intro kind of session into the role, and again, one of those nights that I'll never forget. The guy who was sort of runs the company sort of started. I was like, look, guys, firstly, I'm going to explain what we're going to do. Once you understand it, most of you aren't going to want to be here, so half of you guys are probably going to leave.
Yeah.
Then we're going to come back after a break, and the guys who actually want this role, we're going to do some testing and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right? So explain the role and explain what it was. And really, like it was a role where very high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
So like, and this is one of the things I didn't really understand at the time, but anytime you're in the property space, whether you're a real estate agent, whether you're working for a builder, whether you're working as a buyer's agent, like you get paid commission.
Yeah.
Right. And anytime there's a transaction in property, there's always a commission somewhere. That's just how the industry operates. And so this is a commission only role. So there's no base, there's no nothing. You're going to get paid X amount of commission per property. We want X amount per month.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, you're out.
Wow.
High risk, high reward.
Yeah.
All right. And so, I went through the process and, was, in those kind of top couple of the applicants. And then they offered me the role. And so for me, I went home and it was like, now these are now the options I've got on the table, right?
Yeah.
Do I go with, go work in the mines? Do I go, take this apprenticeship, which will probably end up sending me to the mines?
Yeah.
Or because I've spent so much time away, and when I say time away, when I went to the Middle East, you're away for 6 months.
Yeah. It's not like 2 on, 1 off.
No.
Yeah.
You're away for 6 months. And in that 6 months, because we're in an active war zone for most of it, there is no internet on the ship because you can't send radio communication out.
Yeah.
You get 1 phone call a week.
Wow.
So whereas nowadays when you're on, let's just say you're on your your swinging FIFO, like you got full internet, you fully connected every evening.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case in the Navy.
Yeah.
And so again, I knew at the time, it's like, I do not want to be away, right?
Yeah.
Because being away, there's all these other negative consequences that comes of that people don't talk about. And it's like, I don't believe it's healthy for a functioning human to spend so much time away from their family.
Yep.
All right. And this is one of the reasons why we do what we do now with FIFO workers, because we see this shit every day, right?
Of course, yeah.
So really, it was a case of, hey, this property company actually looks like it could be a really good place to start.
Yeah.
However, we haven't really got any money. I've got 3 months worth of annual leave up my sleeve that I'm going to plan on, using as soon as I discharge. And so there's 3 months worth of income I can get, but that's all I got.
Yeah.
And it became a situation of, I'm going to start this. Failure is not an option.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as failure here.
Yeah.
So any
You're kind of like, I've got to make this work.
Any idea of plan B, gone.
Yeah.
Not interested.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to do this, I'm doing this properly.
Yeah.
Now, I started. The first day, there was a guy by the name of Nick who was kind of the top client manager. Still one of my closest mates today. I love the guy. Basically, he became what I was then now chasing.
The goalpost.
This is now the goalpost.
Yeah.
Right? And keep in mind, this guy was in sales making $500,000 a year.
Wow.
Right? So again, someone in the Navy making $85 grand.
You're like, wow,
seeing
that's heaps.
what guys in the mines are doing. Even at the time, bobber operators and, all these guys making 300 grand. It's like, this dude's working from Perth making $500,000.
Yeah. How?
What? How?
Yeah.
Why? What the fuck? And for me, it was like, he was on this massive pedestal.
Yeah.
And so I made the decision day one. That's the guy I'm shadowing.
Yeah.
That's the guy. I'm replicating his actions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be at the office 30 minutes before, and I'm going to leave the office 30 minutes after he's done.
Yeah.
And I'm going to outwork that dude.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Wow.
All right. So, basically, I think by the end, because I started, I think it was around April. By the time that I'd started, by the time that year was finished, I was in the top few of the client managers.
Yeah.
By the end of the second year, I was the top client manager. So I'd beaten Nick and sort of taken his crown.
Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, Nick. Love you, man, but sorry, man. But look, it was a function of me just refusing I was refusing failure.
Yeah.
And so I had to orientate my actions in a particular way so that failure was just not an option.
Yeah. So how did that accelerate your wealth journey?
So really what it did, because you got to keep in mind, as a client manager, in that first, I'd say probably 6 to 8 months, yes, I was talking about property investment. Yes, I was helping people with property. But what I needed to know was far deeper than just the surface level of what we're talking to clients about.
Yeah.
So this is really where, and there's a few books on the shelf behind you where it's like I had to explore this at a deeper and deeper level and just keep digging. And there was a point after being in that role for a few months where, I kind of felt like I now fully understand that all the mechanics when it comes to this and how all the push and pull and how everything kind of works together.
Felt like the curtain had been taken off.
Right.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And so when the mechanics of property became really apparent for me, and like I said, it was about 6 months into the role, that was where, it kind of, for me, it became a no-brainer.
Mm.
It was like, holy shit, I have the secret to wealth.
Yeah.
Yes, this is something I want to give to everybody and this is what I'm doing for work. But the first thing that I did was I went to my parents and sat them down. I was like, Mom and Dad, I know I'm still doing this right. I know you're still skeptical. You still think this thing's a scam. Like, I know,
Yeah.
I understand the apprehension. But guys, look at this.
This is the path.
Look at this.
Yeah.
Right? Reluctantly, obviously, Mum was quite scared. But the point was, let me take a step back. In the meantime, so this is, throughout the years, that property that we had bought in Maddington.
Yeah.
When they'd sort of upgraded, I went to the Navy, they put tenants into that house.
Yeah.
Tenants burnt it down.
Wow. No
Right.
wonder your mum was skeptical.
Yeah. So tenants burnt it down. So it was just a vacant block at this point.
Yeah.
So what I had done is I had convinced my parents to sell that block, and they sold it for 300. I think it was like 310,000, something like that, as a block.
Yeah.
And then that became 3 deposits on 3 properties over in Brisbane.
Wow.
One north, one south, one to the west in
Yeah.
Brisbane. They bought them all for 400 to 450. They're all worth 800 to 850 today each.
Amazing.
So they're multimillionaires now.
Yeah.
And so really the first thing that I did was I showed my parents and helped them do it.
Yeah. So they kind of essentially became your first clients.
Well, they became my first like actual success story from zero to multimillionaire.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, Cam, Michelle, and there's been a bunch of clients since then. But these guys were kind of like the first. And really, what I'm speaking to is once I had really kind of got the mechanics and understood, holy fuck, this is like not only is this possible, but anyone can pick this up and do this themselves. The first thing I did was I went and spoke to my parents and got them to do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you had the winning numbers for the lottery, most reasonable people would go straight to their parents and help them
Yeah, of course.
and give them the secret. And that was essentially what I'd done. And so again, in one sense, I'm doing this for people, but at the back of my mind, my strategy is also being implemented. Because I had obviously the property in Kenwick, had an investment property in Logan. I started buying more, and and I was just doing the exact same strategy on the side. You know, but again, and I think this is probably an important point. I've got a lot of friends, who saw me when I first started.
Yeah.
And they were skeptical. Yeah. All of them are my clients today.
Yeah, everyone's skeptical until they see the results, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All of my clients today. In fact, I've got more people coming to me today asking for advice, and these were all the same people at the beginning. Were like, "Nah, man, you're working for a scam. You're crazy."
Yeah.
So that's obviously a good outcome. However, my plan hasn't changed from the beginning.
Yeah.
My plan today in 2025 is the exact same plan it was 10 years ago, and that is build the biggest property portfolio I can get my hands on with the least amount of my money.
Yeah.
As fast as I possibly can, so that I can live off my asset base instead of having to exchange my time. And to be clear, I don't even know what I want to do when I grow up. I don't.
Do we ever? Isn't life just a big experiment and we just get to,
Pretty much.
Keep trying different things until we're like, oh yeah, this is great. This is my thing.
Yep.
Or you can have lots of things. That works too.
No, it certainly does. But, there is a difference between living a life in survival versus living a life where you don't need to survive and now you can really focus on the good shit.
Yeah.
Passions, love,
Definitely.
all that stuff.
So at what point did you decide, okay, I want to do this for myself. I want to start Motivate?
So with Motivate, okay, so let's fast forward a couple of years. So I was working for that company, and like I said, within the second year I was the top guy. The following year, I then became the manager of all the sales guys, including Nick, ironically. And so I was now leading the team. And so one of the things that happens when you start to move up in the ranks is you start to kind of see behind the curtain of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
All right. And I want to be clear, and I'm not to get sued by anybody, but there was a few things that were mismatching in values. Yeah. And I'll leave it there. That's kind of what it came down to. Things that I thought, we're making this promise, we're sort of not delivering. We're making these claims. And so from a values perspective, it just wasn't. There was something again that I thought, hang on, there is something wrong with this picture.
Yeah.
All right. I tried to voice it a few times, and I tried to voice it with scenarios and situations and solutions. Hey, we can do this. Hey, what about this? Hey, have you thought about this? And it was a case of like, that's not how we do things here. Kind of fuck off if you want to keep bringing these suggestions up.
Yeah.
And then COVID happened.
COVID happened.
Then COVID happened.
Boom,
Now-
boom, boom.
Now, COVID was the catalyst that I think that I needed for the confidence.
Yeah, right.
Because, that particular company, they were what you would call like an event-based company. So they're doing events, like seminars and workshops and blah, blah, and that's how they kind of get business. So they do like a webinar.
That's kind of like their lead generator.
That's their lead generator. And that's a lot of property investment companies do that. And so, sorry, let me take a step back. So when I was kind of hearing and feeling and seeing these kind of, let's just call them complaints from people, well, actually not complaints, but like there's mismatches in sort of what we're doing. Like I said, I'd kind of voice these concerns, but what I was also doing at the same time was doing research into what are other companies doing.
Yeah.
So, if you're offering, one kind of property or one kind of solution, what about all these other kinds of properties? And they just weren't open to that. But then there was another company who was just doing those kinds of properties.
Yeah.
So I was like inquiring, hang on, how are you guys doing that? Hang on, these guys are doing established as buyers agents. These guys are doing developments. Like I was trying to really get answers so I could go back to them with, hey, here is the reality of what other companies, like, why can't we do something like this? And again, it was a situation of, that's not how we do things, piss off, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
COVID happened. Now, because obviously COVID was a health pandemic, we kind of kicked off, we had to stop doing events, basically, right?
Yeah.
So it went to this like online, booking a call type situation. And after the first couple of weeks of actually seeing that work, that's when I realized, hang on a second, I can do this myself.
Yeah.
Not only can I do this myself, I can do it better.
Mm-hmm.
I can do it more ethically. And I can do it in a way where we can deliver on the promises that we're making.
Yeah.
And that fundamentally is where Motivate came from. Yeah. So I remember specifically we were in lockdown. So I was working from home for a couple of weeks. I'd started getting this kind of idea, hang on, this is probably now the time. When we did get locked down and when I still was doing appointments and working with clients online and it was working, it's like, fuck this. I can do this better.
Yeah. And so ethics and values were like a real kind of foundation for you starting.
Ethics and values, yes, because that's essentially that's your code.
Yeah.
Right? That's your code of how things should work or should look, right?
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing, and this is sort of why we've orientated the company in the way we've orientated it. The one thing that I hate, right, and this is and I want to be careful how I say this. There are a lot of good operators out there in the property space.
Yeah.
Who think they have a really good intention, but when you actually understand what they're doing, they don't. So I'll give you.
They're just selling a product.
They're selling a product. They're selling a strategy, right? So they're a big company, and there's competitors. I'm not going to name them, but there's competitors out there for us who just do, let's just say, developments, or they just do multiple occupancy homes, or they just do house land, or they just do established properties, right?
Yeah.
But the point is if you've got a client who comes to you and says, hey, look, I want to invest. What's the best way of investing? They're always going to tell you, oh, the co-living property is the best way, and here's why. Because that's what they do.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to tell you to walk across the street and go talk to a competitor.
Yeah.
So the problem is like most of these property companies are orientated in a way where they sell a strategy. They're getting clients, they're fitting clients into their strategy, and then that's what they're essentially doing and selling them.
Yeah.
I think that is extraordinarily unethical for a number of reasons, especially in this particular space when we're talking about people's money.
Of course, yeah.
Because everyone's different. Everyone's got different circumstances. Everyone's got different goals. Everyone's got different requirements. Everyone's got different capacities of what they can do and what they can borrow. And so what I wanted to do from day one is when someone walks into our building, what we're able to do is recommend them the best thing for them. The best thing for them is the best thing for them. It might be different for someone else.
Of course.
Now we have an overall methodology, and the overall methodology kind of guides us to help understand, level 1, level 2, level 3, and, the diversification. But the point is, like, our strategy is built around a client. It's not a case that we just get clients and ram our strategy down their throat. That was fundamentally, that was the main misalignment that I had with that particular company, who was promising something different. But that was really that was the fundamental issue that I had.
Yeah, right. When, what would you say has been your biggest obstacle you faced early on in starting Motivate, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah. There's been lots. The biggest lesson that I've learned is really responsibility. Now, ironically, that's one of our core values here.
It is, yeah.
All right. Now, really, when I'm talking about responsibility, it's a function that I'm at the cause of everything. And if I don't operate that way, everything falls apart around me.
Yeah.
So, one example I like to use quite often is like, let's just say, I walk into the building and one of our staff is dancing on the desk. Whose fault is that? It's my fault. All right. Now, it's my fault because I've either said something or have not said something that's given them the illusion that that's okay.
Yeah.
I can't blame them. I can only blame myself. But the problem is when you're in business, you are responsible for everything and everyone.
Yeah.
Always. And so again, every afternoon when I get home, I almost have like a overcompensation of I'm not responsible for fuck all now.
I don't want to do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's really like in business, and this is the one thing that people don't really understand or grasp. When I was, again, a client manager back in the day, and you don't really have much responsibility, it's like you always look at the boss and think, oh, one day when I'm in his position, then I've made it. Then I'm living the dream.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not living a dream.
Yeah.
The responsibility that's on my shoulders, it can crush you if you're not paying very much attention to your mental health.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of responsibility that doesn't leave, especially on nights and weekends. You got the whole, one of the things Mark was telling me about our business coaches, like the CEO alarm clock.
Yeah.
When I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning, stressing about something, freaking out about something, fuck, what about this? And then I now sit on my laptop for the next 3 hours making a plan for it.
Yeah.
It's like you can't, it's extraordinarily difficult to be able to manage that and do that. And so in that line, there are problems that happen.
Yeah.
There's always problems.
Always.
Whether it's problems with, different real estate agents or builders, or whether it's problems with staff, whether it's problems with, marketing or sales, whatever it is. Like there's all these different plates you've got to spin in business. And to be fair, like this shit is not for the faint-hearted at all.
Yeah.
And not only that, but there has not been a single week in the last 5 years of running this company where something hasn't gone wrong. And it's shit you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, always.
Always. I mean,
it's always the things that you don't plan for.
You've always seen it, right? And it's like you...
And just when you think it's all good, right, something else happens.
Something else. And it's like last week, right? We had someone go on stress leave randomly, and then someone just quit.
Yeah.
So now I've got to rehire. And that person... Yeah. So it's like there's all these different things, and it's like we think we've got problems until you start running a business, and you realize you don't have fucking problems.
Oh, it was easy before.
It was, and this is where, again, I've got to take responsibility for the decisions I've made to get to this point. Because this is something I can't quit anymore. Yeah. In fact, and I said this in our staff meeting last week, I feel more trapped today than I've ever felt in my life.
Yeah. And you're really selling the start a business.
Well, to be fair, like it's like, and I want to make this clear, right? When it comes to like the only people who want to start businesses are people who want to put in more energy, put in more money, and take more risk on the hope that they can make more money.
It's what you said before. It's a high risk, high return.
High risk, high reward.
And and it's like people who are willing to go into business, they're willing to take that risk,
right?
For the hope that it will be high return too.
Correct.
Something you talk about a lot, Corey, and even as you've spoken today, you've touched on is like your mindset.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to really like keep your mind in check and to help you in this whole journey?
I like hurting people. No. So,
disclaimer.
I'm talking about jiu-jitsu. No, so look, at the end of the day, your mindset. In fact, I'm actually going to be writing a book pretty soon.
Amazing.
When I've got time. Now, what that book is going to be about is the 7 steps, or it might be 8 steps, I can't remember. I think it's 7 steps to wealth.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, what the book is going to be about is if you follow these 7 steps, I can almost guarantee within 20 years you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
Right? The first chapter and step 1 is all mindset.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Right? One of my favorite quotes is from Henry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Don't particularly like the guy in terms of what he, this backdoor stuff that he was doing, but... and I'm going to paraphrase, if you think you can do something or you can't do something, you're correct. Yeah. Now really what that's talking to, and again, we've seen this on our team. If people feel like they're not confident,
They won't be confident.
they're not confident just thinking that.
Yeah.
If people feel like, if they feel any kind of way, it's like your biology is going to like replicate that. Like you're outwardly, it's just, you can't escape it,
Yeah.
and so fundamentally, when it comes to the mindset, it's important to understand what you want and why you want it. And this comes to the motivators.
Yeah.
Right, like we were talking about before. Like as a kid, I've been running away from money or lack of money.
Yeah.
Right. And I've subconsciously built a life that's just compensating and compensating and compensating so that when I've got kids, I never have to worry about money again. They never have to worry about money again.
Yeah.
Now, there is an argument that conversation is very naive because even today, I'm making my kids suffer. My kids ain't getting my money. They're not getting shit. Like, and look, I'm prepared to have this conversation with them. That's mine and mum's money. That ain't your money. You got to work for it.
Yeah.
But again, it's like I want to be able to replicate my hunger and drive in my kids.
Yeah, of course.
If I just give them shit, they ain't gonna
They're just going to become entitled and
wankers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is an element of, the naive 6-year-old kid running away from what I was running away from is kind of naive today in the way that I actually want to lead my family, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, you've got to be able to first of all understand that your mindset is malleable and it's always in your control.
Yeah.
Most people live like it's not.
Mm.
So this is what we call cause and effect, right? Most people live at the effect of everything.
Yeah.
They get to be victims of everyone else and the world. I have zero fucking interest in that.
Yeah.
I have zero interest in being the effect of anybody or anything. And
Comes back to that responsibility.
Responsibility,
Yeah,
exactly. So if you interchange the word cause, you interchange it with the word responsibility. Responsibility, or cause and effect, responsibility, victimhood.
Yeah.
Same shit, right?
Yeah.
And so fundamentally, the first thing is understanding that not only is everything possible, but I can achieve all of it if I want to.
Yeah.
And that sort of mindset is a mindset that sets you up for success no matter what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be about money.
Yeah.
It can be about the latest art or the latest thing that you're chasing. The point is, if you have an unbreakable mindset that nothing's going to get in your way, nothing's going to get in your way.
Yeah.
Or whatever it does get in your way, you're going to jump, right? The second thing is ensuring and maintaining a healthy balance of life, right? So life is all about balance.
Is there such a thing?
There is, in a way, right? And when I say, like one of the expressions we like to use, especially generally sales teams like to use this, work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
Right? I work extraordinarily hard, harder than most people that I know.
Yeah.
I also play harder than most people I know.
Yeah.
But again, I have to because I have to maintain the balance.
Yeah.
If I work, and a couple of weeks ago, I think I clocked a 90-something hour week from,
Huge week.
from Monday morning to Sunday night, right?
Yeah.
If I don't spend the next week avoiding as much responsibility and not, like, the thing is, like, I'll implode. Everyone will implode.
Yeah.
Like, the human beings were not designed for that kind of, energy and pressure.
Yeah.
We're just not. And so, we've got to make sure we maintain balance. So one of the things that keeps me balanced is martial arts, jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
Train every day. And for those who have not tried jiu-jitsu or don't really know what it is, it's a martial art that doesn't involve striking. It's submission grappling, basically. So the idea is I want to take you down to the floor and then choke you out, or, snap your arm, or, manipulate one of your joints, or put you to sleep in some way without actually physically punching you. And so because jiu-jitsu doesn't involve striking, it's the only martial art you can do, and in training you can go 100% without hurting somebody.
Yeah.
So you can't spar in boxing or kickboxing, Muay
without
Thai,
hurting someone. Yeah.
properly in training.
Yeah.
So you're always doing it super light. Whereas when you go to competition, the temperature is way higher.
Yeah.
Whereas with jiu-jitsu, and one of the things I absolutely love about it is because you can train at 100% and not hurt anybody. Like, we are training like we're trying to kill each other every day.
Yeah.
In fact, 2 hours ago, I spent most of my lunchtime with my arms around someone's neck, trying to kill him, right?
Yeah.
But the point is like having something, and I know for a lot of guys who are fighter, right? Like it's having that kind of gym. It's having that space to go where
Something physical.
we have to, right? And it's like, as much as we need to maintain our our physical body through exercise, we also need to maintain our brain and our capacity through things like books, podcasts. You know, when it comes to, you know, and a lot of the things I love getting into nowadays is like things like philosophy. You know, even like that quote from Henry Ford. It's like, if I use this philosophy as a principle of the way I live my life, like, it not only does it fit anywhere, but it's actually creating a net positive in all those different areas, from the gym, from, you know, to say work with my kids, whatever, you know. So fundamentally, it is a lot, but you've got to look after your brain and your body, you know, and you've got to make sure that you have the discipline of taking the time out, pausing, and actually spending time, not just working and head down, bum up. You got to spend your time outside of work maintaining you. And if you don't, shit's going to fall apart. It's inevitable.
Oh, of course. All right. If this was your last podcast episode ever, your final message to the world, what would you leave the world with? Your final thought.
Final thought. Good question. I've said this one a few times, but I'm going to say it one more time. I'll probably say it again in the future.
You'll say it again in the future. Let's be real.
And again, this is one of those philosophies that I live by. In 200 years, you're dust.
Yeah.
We're all dust. Which kind of goes to show that nothing of what we're saying today is really going to make a difference in the global scheme of things.
Yeah.
In fact, our lives are a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
To me, the biggest failure is wasting that. You know, is living a life watching other people achieve the shit they want to, but you not.
Yeah.
You know, most people want to play it safe. And what safe looks like, and this is how it goes, we want to play safe. Cool. So we buy a house, put our money into super, that's now getting fucking taxed by Labor, but we won't talk about that.
So you have started.
You know, but then, you know, you put money in super, you pay all your taxes so that when you finally retire, you can get the pension, which is $30,000 for a single person, 45 grand for a couple.
Only if you're under a certain bracket.
And if you've got more than 300 grand in, you know, equity, and like the point is, like, playing it safe means you're financially fucked.
Yeah.
Like, playing it safe is not that's not a pathway.
Yeah. Playing
it safe is what happens when you've already lost the game.
It's essentially setting yourself up for poverty.
Completely. So the final takeaway that I've got, you're all dust anyway.
You may as well go for it.
Take a fucking risk.
Yeah.
Take a risk. Go hard. If you fail, start again. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
None of this is going to matter.
Yeah.
That's my...
Awesome.
And I think about that daily, by the way.
Great. Well, thanks for meeting with us today, Corey.
All good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Not a problem. See you next time.